Hello everybody, and welcome to week 8 of Read 5307, 5308, summer 2017. My name is Rochelle Pankey, and David and I are going to be your discussion leaders this week. This week, our reading included chapters 14 through 16 of Overcoming Dyslexia. In particular, we're going to be looking at chapter 14, All Children Can Be Taught to Read, Chapter 15, Helping Your Child Break the Reading Code, and Chapter 16, Helping Your Child Become a Reader. I hope you're enjoying this book as much as I have been. I have thoroughly enjoyed learning more about dyslexia through this very useful text. Chapter 14 focuses on the fact that all children can be taught to read. I really enjoyed this quotation from Dr. Shaywitz. One of the most rewarding experiences I can imagine is seeing a child who was once sad and defeated transformed into one who glows with an eagerness to learn. I know for many years I have been a reading tutor, and I've seen this same transformation happen with students, and it truly is one of the most rewarding moments of my professional life, and it's really wonderful to hear parents say that you have turned their child's life around. What an amazing privilege to be a part of a child's education, especially his or her reading education. In the book, Dr. Shaywitz mentions two particular principles that we need to follow in the guidance of effective reading programs. The first one is to determine where the child is on the developmental continuum. And second, we need to remediate phonologic weakness and access higher level thinking and reasoning. One of the issues that dyslexia intervention in the past has sometimes failed to do is focus on the strengths that the child has. We want to make sure that we really access those higher level thinking strengths as part of our interventions and not just work on remediating the issues that might be problems. In chapter 14, we see some other important points. A couple of things have a major impact on the dyslexic child's experience through school. The first point being how serious the phonological weakness is, and the degree of the child's cognitive strengths impact his or her long-term outlook. Obviously, a child with a greater phonological weakness is going to have more difficulty than a child with a minor phonological weakness, and a child with greater cognitive strengths is going to have an easier time than a child who has less great cognitive strengths, less cognitive strength. The second point here at the top is one that I really want to make sure we pay attention to. The dyslexic child needs a champion. Now, a champion is a knowledgeable, caring adult who actively creates change. In the book, Dr. Shaywitz mentions a parent often being this champion to the child, and parents often are the champion to the child. But we as educators also have the opportunity to be a champion for the dyslexic student or the student who has dyslexia. And we want to make sure that we are watching for those opportunities to really help to be a knowledgeable and caring adult who can work to actively create change for the student. Parents can often be bombarded with information about miracle treatments. I know you can't turn on the internet without seeing the new and improved this or that treatment. But now that we have modern research, we have been able to determine that a growing number of scientists, clinicians, and educators agree about what every child needs to know to become a good reader. So now we actually have some really good, solid clinical medical evidence to show us what's going on in the mind during during reading in the mind or the brain of a student who has dyslexia. And we'll see reference later on to the National Reading Panel, who released the report of the National Reading Panel Teaching Children to Read, an evidence-based assessment of the scientific research literature on reading and its implications for reading instruction, which was released on April 13, 2000, and has guided many of the decisions made with regard to reading programs. In Chapter 15, Dr. Shaywitz goes on to explain the reading code. The reading code has two major components, spoken language and written language. Spoken language is addressed in this way. At the very beginning stage of reading, the initial goal is to draw the child's attention to the sounds of language. These sounds can include things like an awareness of rhyme, also working on words, segmenting, separating into syllables, and separating into phonemes. Part of my field experience this summer has given me the opportunity to work with a young child who actually was in sort of this pre-reading stage, this emergent stage, and some of the points we've been working on have been an awareness of rhyme and segmenting and separating dissyllables and separating into phonemes. So I can tell you that I've actually been utilizing some of the techniques that she mentions in Chapter 15, and I can tell you that based on my experience, they're quite effective. The other portion of the reading code is written language. I think it's really fascinating when you consider that there are only 44 phonemes in English, and those 44 phonemes help us to create an infinite variety of sounds. There is no substitute for practice for creating neural circuits related to expertise or skill. We wouldn't hesitate to encourage a child to practice his piano, to practice her violin, to practice free throws in basketball. We also need to encourage children to practice reading. And that reading will need to include reading words in isolation as well as sentences in books, reading silently and aloud, and practicing writing words and learning to spell them. You want to focus on things like sight words, writing, spelling, listening, playing, and imagining, and self-confidence. These are all especially important during the kindergarten year. Which leads to the next point, the final point in Chapter 15, which is the right fit in kindergarten. Dr. Shaywitz emphasizes the importance of the initial assessment, which she suggests should be conducted after one semester of kindergarten. Different children come into kindergarten with really different levels of knowledge, background knowledge. So it's important that we give them a semester to kind of find their feet and learn a bit before we try to assess them. It's also important to reassess at the end of the year. And Dr. Shaywitz advises really strongly, really adamantly against retention. She says, above all, do not keep the child back a year in school. She states that research shows retention is ineffective, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you all think about this issue on our discussion board this week. Chapter 16 is also targeted to the parent, helping your child become a reader. Hopefully, most of us, as reading educators, were already exposed to much of the content that is part of Chapter 16, but there were some points that I thought were particularly helpful that it might be worth reiterating. At the end of first grade, a child should have a reading vocabulary of about 400 words. That's really quite a lot of words when you think about it. Reading really needs to follow a progression of knowledge, starting with sounding out small words, and Dr. Shaywitz emphasizes the importance of phonics. Most of us have probably heard quite a lot about the debate between phonics and whole language and possibly other methods of teaching reading as well. But the National Reading Panel did determine through observing and evaluating scientific-based reading programs that phonics is really the only system, as long as it's taught systematically and explicitly, that can provide greater progress in students' reading than any other type of instruction. And it's the only system that equips a student to sound out or find out what unfamiliar words say. Even words in isolation can be decoded by a student who has learned phonics, whereas whole language does rely on context or accompanying pictures to help the student figure out what the word is. So really, phonics instruction is the only one that helps students decode unfamiliar words. Chapter 16 continues with taking apart bigger words, and this is a quote you probably have heard before. I know I have, but it bears repeating. A child learns to read in grades 1 through 3, but reads to learn, acquire new information, in grades 4 through 8. So in those first 3 years, it's very important that we focus on phonics and teaching children to read well so that they are well prepared for grades 4 through 8, and I would say continuing on 9 through 12 as well, when they are actually reading to learn, reading to acquire new information. In my teaching experience, I've taught pretty much every age group of one type or another, and one of the issues that I have found, even with my oldest students, my 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students, is if they struggle with reading, they really struggle in all content areas. Part of taking apart bigger words would be finding the natural breaks in a word, something we would help a younger student do, 1st or 2nd grade student. Things like compound words, syllable breaks, you can count the number of times your jaw moves. dividing between consonants. And here's one that I found really helpful even with my older students, knowing word derivations, including affixes and etymology or word origins. And this is really important. Note that etymology aids reading, pronunciation, spelling, and meaning. Knowing the root of a word can help you figure out what the word means, even if you don't have a clue about any other part of the word. Knowing those Greek and Latin bases is super helpful. Continuing to help the parent teach the child or help the child. The last part of the chapter here is divided into how the parent can help the child at school and how the parent can help the child at home. And we teachers are teachers, but many of us are also parents, so I think it bears looking at these 2 points of at school and at home from the perspective of the parent and the perspective of the teacher. At school, it's important for us to know what method the school is using, both as parents and as teachers, and to watch for the critical elements that are listed here. At home, teachers will want to know these tips too. Parents can work with their children for 15 to 20 minutes a few times per week. The work at home really needs to focus on practicing and reinforcing what the child is learning at school. It's super important that we're not trying to introduce a lot of new material, but rather reinforcing what the child is already learning. And reading together, boy, you can't really beat that. It's fun for the child to read to you, it's fun for you to read to the child, but it's important that when the child is reading to you that the material is within the child's ability to read comfortably. And the rule of thumb is 19 out of 20 words on the page correct, or I've also heard if the child misses 5 words or more near the beginning of the book is too hard. It's a good idea to pick something else. And we have some other resources available here to us to help us figure out if a text is in the right reading level for the child. A few takeaways. Early research-based intervention can transform the dyslexic child into a reader. Breaking the reading code involves spoken and written language, and an important role of kindergarten is providing children with experiences designed to build the necessary brain connections accurately, strongly, and quickly. Assessment and reassessment are key to monitoring progress. In addition to being champions for the students, parents and educators can work together to teach new material and reinforce learning at home, and there is no substitute for practice. Our questions for this week. Question 1 I'd like you to consider is Dr. Shaywitz stands against retention very firmly. Please see pages 195 through 196. Based on your opinion and experience as a student and/or an educator, do you agree with her stance? Why or why not? Question 2, please consider, in these chapters of Overcoming Dyslexia, we see a general timeline for teaching reading in kindergarten and first grade especially. Many of the skills listed for first grade are currently being taught in kindergarten, and students are expected to arrive at kindergarten with many of the early reader or kindergarten reading skills already in place. Do you think this push-down practice is helpful or harmful to our students? Are we assisting them to advance faster or expecting too much of them? Please give reasons for your answers. And this final quote is one I'd like you to consider as just a word of encouragement. By teaching a student to read, we change the world. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you have to say on the discussion board, and I hope that this summary of this week's reading was helpful to you. Have a wonderful day.